Welcome to the Clarity Funds podcast. I'm Dr. Owen Anderson, and we've been doing a series on anxiety, the age of anxiety, in order to connect with the age of skepticism. A skeptical age is an age in which the foundations have been removed. What people thought they knew about basic things, they don't know. And those basic things include our beliefs about God or the world, what is real. They include our beliefs about what is good and valuable. And in a time like that, a time where foundations aren't present, people are looking around for meaning, and they're expecting catastrophe at any moment. And as I'm speaking about this, I'm thinking of Paul Tillich, who said something similar. And today we're going to look at Tillich and his view of anxiety. I quoted him in our first episode on anxiety, on the age of anxiety, because his theology helps explain what anxiety is. And so let's look at what he said. I'm going to read the quote I read a few episodes back now. This is from roughly 1947, explaining what had happened in the first part of the 20th century. And he says, first of all, a feeling of fear, or more exactly of indefinite anxiety, was prevailing. Not only the economic and political, but also the cultural and religious security seemed to be lost. There was nothing on which one could build. Everything was without foundation. A catastrophic breakdown was expected every moment. Consequently, a longing for security was growing in everybody. A freedom that leads to fear and anxiety had lost its value. Better authority with security than freedom with fear. So there's a number of concepts I want to look at from that quote, beginning with the idea of fear. And the fear that he's speaking of is related to what is indefinite, not knowing. So anxiety goes with not knowing, which is how I've been relating them this whole time. Beginning with the idea that we live in an age of skepticism, but that anxiety is the inner sense of that skepticism. It's the more in connection to the personal life. A person may not be able to articulate the skepticism, but they can say, I'm feeling anxious, and they might have a kind of free-floating anxiety. And so here he's cleaning that up. It's a kind of fear or dread is another word used. Now, fear could be a good thing. Right? I mean, when someone's afraid of the appropriate kinds of dangers, then that's healthy. When they're not afraid of something that could be dangerous, well, that's not healthy. They can harm themselves because they go ahead in a foolhardy way and don't take care, don't take caution. So fear in itself is not bad. But it's a fear of what? And what if you have a free-floating fear? You're simply afraid. And someone says, why are you afraid? And it's kind of hard to identify why. It's not because of a imminent problem that could come up. You could identify, like, I'm going to be in a car accident, or my house is going to be robbed, or something like that. I'm going to get sick. It's not even something unrealistic. A meteorite is going to fall on my house and crash through my bedroom specifically. But you have a kind of fear about existing, about living, about reality. And that's what we've been connecting up with anxiety, not specific worries like, oh no, what if I lose my job, or specific stresses. I have a project due at my job next week and I have a lot to do between now and then. But anxiety in connection with that realization that I don't know and I don't have what is meaningful in life. And that's a kind of fear, a fear of existing. Because what if it turns out existing has no purpose, no reason, no meaning? And so he's connecting up that idea of fear that way. And he's saying this was not simply economic and political fear, but that religious fear. What if, when it comes down to it, existing has no meaning? And there's nothing on which one could build. Everything was without foundation. Now, for me, that reminds me of the parable of the builder, when Jesus speaks about the builder who builds on the sand and the builder who builds on a rock. And when we build a house, we do that. We lay a cement foundation. We make a rock on which to build. We don't simply set it on the sand. And what happens with the one who builds on the sand is when the storm comes, there's no foundation, so the building is destroyed. So I'm thinking of that when I read Tillich's idea that there was no foundation. And what is foundational? Not any belief is foundational. Beliefs are ordered so that we can speak about them being foundational. And this is broader than what some in philosophy called foundationalism. So if you have that background, you're thinking, oh, this is foundationalism, and people have rejected that. Well, that's a different topic. Tillich is not referring to that. He's referring to just this observation that beliefs are ordered. We have some beliefs that play that role. We'll call them basic, logically basic. They play that role of supporting the other beliefs, so that if a logically basic belief in my system isn't true, well, then the other beliefs it supports aren't true either. And so that's the direction it goes, not the other way around. And so I have to get those foundations in place. They have to be correct, and if they're not, I'll be building on sand. And that's what happens. That's what he mentions next. Everything was without foundation, he said. And so they're expecting a catastrophic breakdown at any moment. Well, why? Well, that's the storm that Jesus spoke of. When the storm comes, the water rises, the structure can't last. And so people are realizing that. What we've built our lives on isn't permanent. And it can be destroyed. And the storms are coming. The waters are rising, and the structure won't last. Well, what can we build on? Notice the foundation can't simply be a psychological foundation, which is that you personally are certain of it, but it has to really be the foundation. So in other words, you might build on something that you thought was the foundation, you were very confident, and you don't find out that it isn't until that storm comes and knocks it over. On the other hand, you might say, no, I don't have any foundation at all. So what are our basic beliefs that provide that kind of foundation? I think our most basic belief has to do with what is, what exists. That's more basic than other beliefs we have. So, for example, if I have a book in front of me, and the book has a blue cover, someone could say the book is blue. Or it's about, say, 8 inches by 5 inches. The book has those dimensions. Or the book is on the desk. Or the book is closed. Or the book is older. Those are all qualities the book has. But notice with each of those statements about the book, the word is present. The word is about existing, right? So the book can't be blue on the desk, be older, if it doesn't exist, if it's not real. Now, you might say, well, what about a fictional book, right? So then you'd say, in the fictional story, there's a book that's blue, right? So then you're qualifying it. But right now we're talking about what is real. Things that are real, things that exist. So existence is our most basic belief. What is real? And what if we don't know what is real? I mean, if we don't know what is real, we won't be able to face the threats of life. Like if I don't know what threats there are because I don't know what is real, I don't even know what I am, you can see where that would be anxiety producing. Now there might be this person who's very calm and seems to approach the vicissitudes of life with calmness, but it's a simpleton kind of calmness. It's because they haven't really evaluated. They don't appropriately see the threats that they have, that they don't know either. So we don't want to go down that road on the one hand, but we also don't want to end up in the road of skepticism where we don't know. So the thinking we know when we don't know is as bad as not knowing what we should know. So beliefs about existence, what is real? And Tillich is well known for talking about religion as a belief in that highest reality, what gives ultimate meaning. So he says that's what makes all the religions similar. And notice he focuses there on beliefs about that. Some others might take it as a sense about what is ultimate, which is a whole different thing, right? A sense, you might have a sense that something is in the next room, but you can't articulate any beliefs about it. That's different than having beliefs about it. So our beliefs, our basic beliefs about what is real and what is the highest reality, not just other realities, because the other things are explained by the highest reality. So we want to explain things. In order to do that, we have to know what things are permanent and what things are changing. And what is permanent has always existed. Otherwise it changed. Went from not being to being. So we're looking for what is permanent, what is always, what is eternal. And that's our most basic belief, our belief about what being is eternal. Now, a big part of the modern world and the history that Tillich's talking about comes just after Nietzsche and the denial that God is real. So-called death of God. That doesn't mean that there was some fellow named God who had a cardiac arrest and keeled over. It's the realization that this whole time God has been fictional, but we've built our lives on a fiction. Now, interestingly, that could be true, and it also is true God exists, because it might be that the God on which persons built their lives was an idol. And Nietzsche actually has a work on that, The Twilight of the Idols, in which he's picking up on a theme from Francis Bacon, who also spoke about idols that held us back from knowledge. So it could be true. It could be that, you built on a projection of what you thought God was like, not building on reality. So how do we get to the knowledge of God? This is not something new, and so the modern or contemporary mindset might be, look, lots of people have tried that and failed. What on earth makes you think you could propose something in the 21st century about the knowledge of God that Plato or Aristotle or Augustine and Aquinas or Luther and Calvin hadn't thought of? Surely it's all been done before, and we've come to the 20th and now the 21st century, and we've had to wake up and realize there is no God. We don't know. Now, what's really interesting about that is that idea of waking up and realizing there is no God isn't new. That's an ancient claim. And many times the first philosophers are found doing that in competition or in argument with the mythology. The gods aren't real. Only matter exists. So that isn't new. That debate has been going on for some time. And I think we can settle it by learning to have integrity, to be consistent. And we can apply our consistency to our beliefs about what is real. Let me give an example. We can't believe that nothing is eternal. Now, what I mean by that is nothing has existed from eternity. There was once only nothing, and then what now exists came into being from nothing. That's an incoherent belief. Nothing doesn't produce things, and things don't come from nothing. That's what nothing is. So that's a direct contradiction to make such claims about nothing. And so what we're left with is that there must have always been something. Something must have existed from eternity. Now, what is it? We're not yet to God, as in theism. But we are past that first step. Nothing is eternal means the same as saying all is temporal, which means the same as saying all had a beginning, which means the same as saying all came into being from non-being, which is the contradiction. Being and non-being are fundamentally different. You don't get being from non-being. Non-being doesn't do things. And so we're left then with this idea that something has existed from eternity. What is it? It could be that someone says there's a series, a beginningless series of things, each of which comes into existence and goes out of existence, causing the next. So none of them, no individual thing in that series is eternal, but the series is eternal. There was never nothing and then something. Or it could be that someone says the material world is eternal. And it's kind of like what I just described, because there might be universes coming in and out of existence through the Big Bang and the Big Crunch. Or someone could say maybe the one mind is eternal. And we're all part of the one mind. Matter is an idea in that one mind. We're an idea in that one mind. Or it could be someone says both of those are true. There's a one mind who is co-eternal with the material world and sees the stuff of the material world out of order and orders it into what we see around us now. So we can call those monism, oneism, the beliefs that say there's only one kind of thing. Or that last one is called dualism. There are two kinds of things. But what those share in common is the claim that all things have existed from eternity. and they're in contrast to the belief in God the Creator. God alone is eternal, and in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, everything else. So those other things weren't eternal. They didn't exist with God from the beginning or from eternity. They had a beginning, but God didn't have a beginning. And so you get here the two world systems. On the one hand, all things in some form are eternal. On the other hand, only God is eternal. Now, as we come into the 20th and now the 21st century, those two views are still in tension. And so we get Tillich's assessment that it seemed as if there was nothing on which one could build. Everything was without foundation. We'd come confidently into the 20th century, and our knowledge claims were undermined. And so he discusses a freedom that leads to fear and anxiety. Why? Well, what is that anxiety? Well, what he especially thinks it revolves around is the fear of non-being. The fear of no longer existing. And why? What is that? Tillich and Heidegger and Reinhold Niebuhr are thinkers that talk about this. The threat of not existing. Because we're a creature who has self-conscious awareness of his being, but we're also aware that at any moment we might cease to exist. And so because of this, anxiety arises as the individual is aware of being as over against the ever-present possibility of non-being. Now, interestingly there, he's positing those two kinds of things. Heidegger does something similar with being and time. He only considers being as changing. He doesn't consider that there may be eternal being, changeless being. So the analysis for Tillich and Heidegger is in terms of change. Being and change. Being as a verb there, existing. In contrast to being as what is real and permanent, unchanging. And so man would have connection to what is eternal by knowing it. That's how humans would come to have connection with that. We don't become eternal, obviously, because you can't go from having had a beginning to having not had a beginning. We're always created and temporal, but we have connection with what is real and permanent by knowing about it, and that knowledge is what's foundational. That knowledge is what can't be taken away and on which you build. But if you didn't come to have that knowledge, then you don't have anything on which to build. So this threat of non-being, he thinks, lies in spiritual and psychological realms as the threat of meaninglessness. So even if you continue to exist, your existence is meaningless, which is a kind of non-being. It's the destruction of the self. And so when you're confronted with that kind of anxiety, the individual realizes that threat of meaninglessness and tries to take a stand against the threat, but then realizes they have nothing with which to make a stand. They're standing on shifting sand. And the result is a strengthening of anxiety and being perplexed. Realizing that although I see meaninglessness as a threat, I have nothing with which to combat it. Anything I combat it with is simply invented by myself. As such, is unreal. So I might make up things to say I now have a purpose because I made up a purpose. But that's no better than the shifting sand. That just is the shifting sand. Without getting to knowledge of what is eternal, and I gave an example before, our first step of how we can know something is eternal, we won't get to anything permanent. Now, interestingly, I should add about what is eternal, that what is eternal is also changeless, permanent, unchanging. And so there can't be only being in time, which is what Heidegger thinks about, and the threat of non-existence to being in time, and how we're supposed to find meaning in such a predicament. Now, Niebuhr also makes anxiety a central concept in his theological doctrine of man. He thinks of every act, creative or destructive, as involving an element of anxiety, because anxiety has its source in the fact that we are finite. we're involved, like the animals, in contingencies and necessities of nature. And so on the other hand, though, compared to the animals, we have freedom. And so because of this, we're both bound and free. We're limited and limitless. And that's a bit of an odd way to phrase it, because just because we have freedom doesn't make us limitless, or freedom is still within limits. I can't, by a free choice, will myself to be eternal meaning without beginning, because I already had a beginning. But this theological sense of anxiety is what he thinks is the internal description of the state of temptation. And so the temptation was to reach for, to try to be what is limitless, to be like God instead of being finite and limited. And that's anxiety producing, because we see on the one hand we're not, but on the other hand, he thinks we have that limitless ability to try to will that. Because we're both limited and limitless, and that conflict within us is what causes anxiety. And we've spoken about that here as well, that conflict within us produces anxiety, because that conflict is it's a product of the lack of integrity, a lack of consistency. And so it's true, if we believed of ourselves, I'm both limited and limitless, well, that's inconsistent. And so I would have that anxiety. It's inconsistent not just because limited and limitless don't go together, but also because of myself, I can't be limitless. I'm always created, finite, temporal, and the temptation to will myself to be otherwise is asking me to will something that is a contradiction, which then produces anxiety. So interestingly, anxiety as the product of accepting the temptation. Or, to use Tillich's other term, meaninglessness. Meaninglessness follows from accepting the temptation that you can be as God. You could be limitless, to use Niebuhr's term. Because you can't. You're a creature. You can certainly excel and do lots of wonderful things, but you can't ever know good and evil the way God knows good and evil. And so the consequence inherent to accepting that contradiction or that conflict or losing your integrity is meaninglessness. And that meaninglessness is felt in anxiety, the anxiety we've been talking about in this series. Now, as we conclude, thinking about, well, what does Niebuhr or Heidegger or Tillich want us to do? We began with Tillich and his analysis of having lost foundations, the modern crisis. We could call it late modernity or post-modernity, the crisis in having no foundations on which to support meaning and the consequence of meaninglessness. The solution is to see the conflict that we've identified here. We do need to have knowledge, and we need to be able to see, that is to know, by using reason, what is eternal. We began that process in this talk. We can know that something's eternal. I gave that as an example to show that we should have hope in being able to do that and show that together. Now we need to take some more steps. I identify the two systems. On the one hand, the system of all is eternal. And on the other hand, the system of only God is eternal. And those two continue to be in conflict now, but that conflict doesn't tell us anything. We can't conclude from that to say, well, I guess we can't know, as some might want us to do. Instead, we can use that conflict to say, there must be more basic things that have not yet been resolved. Let's get those in focus. And by getting them in focus, we'll be able to make progress in resolving this conflict. And so our plan is to continue to do that, to get those more basic differences into focus so that we can come to agreement, come to see which of these two views is true. Thanks for joining me.